It's 2:14 a.m. Your phone buzzes on the nightstand. The caller ID is completely blank. You answer it expecting a late-night emergency from a family member, but instead you hear the chilling sound of a man whispering a deadly, impossible promise. You tell yourself it's just a sick prank. You block the number, you try to sleep, but what if the man on the other end isn't just a stalker? What if he's something far older, far more dangerous, and by simply answering his call, he just claimed your soul? Listen closely. The rain was lashing against the third-floor windows of Harper Delaney's apartment on Joy Street, a narrow historic stretch of Boston's Beacon Hill. It was a miserable Tuesday in late October. At 26, Harper lived a life dictated entirely by spreadsheets, pivot tables, and the grueling demands of being a senior financial analyst at KPMG. She was exhausted. The blue light from her Dell XPS laptop washed over her pale face, illuminating the dark circles under her hazel eyes. Her half-empty mug of chamomile tea had gone ice-cold hours ago. She rubbed her temples, trying to focus on the quarterly projections for a major tech acquisition, when the sharp, sudden vibration of her iPhone 14 shattered the quiet of the room. Harper flinched. The clock on her screen read 2:14 a.m. She stared at the glowing device. The caller ID was entirely blank. No unknown caller, no string of random digits, just an empty, glowing void where a name should be. Her stomach tightened. Late-night calls rarely brought good news. Her immediate thought darted to her younger sister Madison, who was notorious for drinking too much at dive bars in Southie and losing her friends. With a heavy sigh, Harper picked up the phone and swiped the screen. "Maddie, are you okay? Where are you?" Harper asked, her voice raspy from hours of silence. There was no immediate response. Instead, a bizarre, heavy static filled the line, a sound like crumbling stone and harsh winter wind, utterly unlike the usual hum of a cellular network. Then came the breathing, slow, rhythmic, and impossibly deep. "It is done," a voice spoke. Harper froze. The voice did not belong to anyone she knew. It was male resonant and coated in a dark velvet smoothness that sent a cold spike of adrenaline straight down her spine. It sounded like it was echoing in a vast, cavernous room. "The rogue has been dealt with," the man continued, his tone devoid of any human empathy. "His ashes have been scattered into the harbor. Ensure the rest of his bloodline is severed before dawn. Leave no witnesses." Harper's breath hitched in her throat. Her fingers gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. A murder. Her rational mind scrambled for footing. "Is this a prank? A wrong number? The mafia? I think you have the wrong number," Harper stammered, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "I don't know who this is." The line fell dead silent. The heavy, unnatural wind in the background ceased entirely. For 5 agonizing seconds, neither of them breathed. "Who is this?" the man asked. The casual authority in his voice was suddenly replaced by a sharp, lethal curiosity. "You called me," Harper said, trying to summon a shred of defiance. "I'm hanging up now. Don't call this number again." "A human," he murmured softly. The words weren't meant for her, yet they vibrated through the phone speaker with crystal clarity. How profoundly fascinating. The encryption on this line is bound by ancient blood magic. It cannot be crossed by a mortal network. And yet, here you are. "Listen to me, whatever sick joke this is. It isn't funny," Harper snapped, panic finally overtaking her exhaustion. "If you call again, I am contacting the Boston police. I'll have Verizon trace this line. Leave me alone." A low, dark chuckle echoed through the receiver. It was a sound that made the hairs on Harper's arms stand at attention. It wasn't the laugh of a prankster. It was the laugh of an apex predator, realizing a mouse had wandered into its cage. "You answered the call, little bird," the man whispered, his voice suddenly sounding as though his lips were brushing directly against her ear, bypassing the phone entirely. "Fate has handed you to me. Run if you wish, hide if you must, but from now on you're mine." Click. The line disconnected. The normal, hollow dial tone filled the silence of Harper's living room. She yanked the phone away from her ear, her chest heaving, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She immediately opened her call log. The most recent call slot was completely empty. It didn't even show a missed or received call at 2:14 a.m. It was as if the conversation had never happened. Harper slammed the laptop shut and double-checked the deadbolts on her apartment door. She drew all the blinds, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "It's just a hacker," she whispered to herself, pacing the hardwood floor. "Just some sick, twisted hacker using VoIP software to mess with people." But as she crawled into her bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin, the temperature in the room plummeted, and for the rest of the night, as the rain beat against the glass, Harper couldn't shake the terrifying sensation that she was no longer alone. The morning sun did little to burn away the creeping dread that had settled in Harper's stomach. By 7:30 a.m., she was already power-walking down Charles Street, clutching the lapels of her beige trench coat against the biting autumn wind. The rational light of day had given her a fragile shield of logic. It was a spoofed call she repeated internally like a mantra. Some MIT frat boys messing with telecom towers. She pushed through the heavy glass doors of Tata Bakery and Cafe, seeking the comforting, mundane smells of roasted espresso and fresh pastries. The cafe was bustling with morning commuters, doctors from Mass General and tourists. Harper ordered her usual flat white and stood near the window waiting for her name to be called. That was when she felt it. It wasn't a physical touch, but a heavy magnetic pull at the base of her skull. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. Harper turned slowly, looking through the cafe's large front window. Parked illegally across the street, idling silently in the bus lane, was a sleek, jet-black Rolls-Royce Phantom. The windows were tinted so heavily they looked like solid slabs of obsidian. Boston traffic swirled aggressively around the luxury vehicle, horns blaring, but the Rolls-Royce remained perfectly still. Even from across the street, Harper felt the oppressive weight of a gaze fixed entirely on her. "Harper, flat white for Harper," the barista called out. Harper jumped, nearly dropping her purse. She grabbed her coffee, mumbled a rapid thank you, and hurried out the side exit. When she glanced back over her shoulder, the Rolls-Royce was gone. No screeching tires, no engine roar, just vanished. The workday at KPMG was a blur of distracted errors. Her co-worker Liam, a sharp-eyed accountant who sat at the desk adjacent to hers, noticed her spilling coffee on her blouse and staring blankly at her dual monitors. "Rough night, Delaney?" he asked, leaning over the partition. "You could say that," Harper muttered, forcing a tight smile. "Just a prank caller keeping me up." By 6 p.m., she was eager to retreat to the safety of her apartment, but the sanctuary of her home was shattered the moment she walked into the lobby of her Beacon Hill building. Hector, the elderly concierge who had worked there for 20 years, waved her down from his desk. "Ms. Delaney, a package arrived for you," Hector said, adjusting his spectacles. He reached under the counter and produced a square box wrapped in immaculate midnight blue velvet. There was no shipping label, no stamps, no return address. "Who dropped this off?" Harper asked, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Hector frowned, looking slightly dazed. "You know, I'm not entirely sure. A courier, I think. Tall gentleman, very pale. He just placed it on the desk and told me it was of the utmost importance that you receive it the moment you arrived." Harper took the box. It was surprisingly heavy. She thanked Hector, hurried to the elevator, and practically sprinted down the hall to her apartment. Once inside, with the deadbolt secured, she set the velvet box on her kitchen island. She stared at it for a long time, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. With trembling fingers, she untied the black silk ribbon holding the box shut and lifted the lid. Resting on a bed of dark satin was a breathtakingly beautiful antique necklace. The chain was heavy spun from pure ancient gold, and at its center sat a massive, flawless crimson ruby that seemed to catch and trap the dim light of the kitchen. It was a piece of jewelry that belonged in a museum easily worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tucked beside the ruby was a small note written on thick, cream-colored parchment. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and penned in dark crimson ink. "Your heart beats at an average of 80 beats per minute, but yesterday over the line it raced to 130. I prefer it when it races. Wear this. It matches the warmth of your blood." Harper dropped the note as if it had caught fire. She stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the counter. The air in the apartment felt thin, suffocating. He knew where she lived. He had people watching her. She shoved the necklace and the note into her purse and hailed an Uber straight to the Boston Police Department District A1 station on Sudbury Street. The station was loud, chaotic, and smelled faintly of stale coffee and floor wax. She waited an hour before being seated across from a burly, overworked detective named O'Connor. Harper poured out the entire story: the impossible phone call, the vanished caller ID, the Rolls-Royce, and finally she slammed the velvet box onto his metal desk. Detective O'Connor opened the box, his eyebrows raising slightly at the massive ruby. He picked it up, inspected it, and then chuckled softly. "Nice piece of costume jewelry, Miss Delaney. Very convincing." "Costume?" Harper stared at him aghast. "It's real gold. Look at the note he's stalking me." O'Connor sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Look, miss, you live in a nice area. You work at a big firm. Some guy with too much money and zero social skills is trying to woo you aggressively. It happens. Without a caller, ID, a license plate for this mystery car, or a physical threat of violence, there's no crime here. Just a creepy admirer. He talked about scattering ashes into the harbor, Harper insisted, her voice rising. And you think a real mafia hitman is going to mail you a love letter the next day? O'Connor handed the box back to her. Go to the Verizon store, change your number, get a Ring camera for your door. If he shows up and refuses to leave, then you call 911. Harper walked out of the police station feeling entirely defeated. The reality of the world, the law, the police, the logical structures she relied on were useless against whatever was hunting her. As she stepped out into the chilly Boston night, a thick fog was beginning to roll in from the harbor, cloaking the city streets in a suffocating gray shroud. By Friday, the paranoia had practically eaten Harper alive. She had changed her phone number, called in sick to work for 2 days, and barely slept. But by Friday evening, KPMG demanded she come in to finalize a mandatory compliance report that couldn't wait. She stayed at the office late, the glowing screens of the empty financial floor her only company. By 8:30 p.m., she finally hit submit and packed her bag. The skyscraper in the financial district was a ghost town. The cleaning crew hadn't even arrived yet. Harper took the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. The concrete cavern was damp and echoed with the distant drip of a leaking pipe. Her Honda Civic was parked on level B3, a dark corner far from the elevator banks. She gripped her car keys, lacing the metal keys between her fingers like a makeshift weapon, a trick Madison had taught her. She walked briskly, the clicking of her heels bouncing off the concrete walls. Pop! Harper stopped. 50 feet ahead of her, one of the overhead fluorescent lights shattered, showering the asphalt in sparks and glass. Pop! Pop! 2 more lights exploded behind her. The garage was plunging into darkness, section by section. Panic seized her chest. Harper broke into a sprint toward her car, fumbling for her keys. She reached the driver's side door, her hands shaking so violently she dropped the keys onto the concrete floor. "Damn it!" she sobbed, dropping to her knees. She pulled out her iPhone and flicked on the flashlight, sweeping the harsh white beam across the floor to find her keys. The beam illuminated her keychain, but right beside her keys were a pair of immaculate black leather dress shoes. Harper's breath stopped. She slowly trailed the beam of her flashlight up, past flawlessly tailored black trousers, a bespoke charcoal suit jacket, a silk tie, and finally resting on a face that defied human logic. The man standing over her was devastatingly handsome, with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass and skin as flawless and pale as polished marble. His dark hair was immaculately styled, but it was his eyes that made Harper's blood run cold. They were a deep, mesmerizing shade of crimson, glowing faintly in the dim light of the parking garage. "You didn't wear the necklace," he said. The voice was identical to the one on the phone, deep velvet, vibrating with a terrifying ancient power. Harper scrambled backward on her hands and feet, terror ripping through her throat in a ragged scream. She grabbed a can of pepper spray from her purse and aimed it blindly. "Stay back. I swear to God, stay away from me." The man tilted his head. A slow, cruel smile curved his lips. Before Harper could blink, a rush of cold wind hit her face. The man simply vanished from the beam of her flashlight. "God cannot help you down here, Harper." A whisper sounded directly behind her ear. She whirled around. He was standing an inch away from her. He reached out with terrifying gentleness, his cold, iron-hard fingers wrapping around her wrist. With a casual flick of his thumb, he snapped the safety lock off the pepper spray, took it from her hand, and tossed it over his shoulder. The can clattered away into the darkness. What are you?" Harper choked out her back, hitting the cold metal of her car. "My name is Roman Ashford," he said, stepping into her space, towering over her. His scent enveloped her, an intoxicating mixture of petrichor, ancient parchment, and metallic blood. "I am the sovereign of the Night Court, a king among immortals, and until 3 nights ago I was completely unbothered by the existence of one insignificant mortal accountant." He reached out his thumb, tracing the racing pulse at the side of her neck. His touch was freezing, yet it left a trail of scorching fire on her skin. Harper's mind screamed at her to run, but her body was paralyzed, trapped in the magnetic, hypnotic snare of his crimson eyes. "My telecommunications are bound by old blood magic, designed to only connect with my lieutenants," Roman explained softly, his gaze locked on her lips. "To intercept such a call, a mortal would need a bloodline steeped in latent magic, an anomaly, a genetic impossibility. You answered a call meant for a vampire, Harper. By doing so, you opened a mystical tether between us." "I didn't. It was a mistake," Harper cried, tears finally spilling hot down her cheeks. "Let me go, please. A mistake! Roman's eyes darkened, the crimson flaring wildly. The tether acts as a beacon. The moment you spoke to me, every rival faction, every feral beast, every enemy of the Night Court in New England sensed your presence. They know what you are. They know you hold a connection to my mind. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. If I leave you here, you will be hunted down and torn to pieces before sunrise. No, she whimpered, shaking her head. Yes, he corrected softly, his grip on her waist tightening, pulling her flush against his solid, unyielding chest. But they will not touch you, because you belong to me now, by right of the tether, by right of my claim. The shadows in the parking garage seemed to physically detach from the walls, swirling around them like living smoke. Harper felt her vision blurring, an unnatural lethargy sinking into her bones. He was compelling her, drowning her conscious mind in his power. Sleep, little bird, Roman whispered, his fangs grazing the sensitive skin of her throat. When you wake, you will be in my world. Harper's eyes rolled back, and the harsh reality of the Boston parking garage faded into terrifying, absolute blackness. Harper woke to the smell of crushing ocean salt and blooming night jasmine. For a fraction of a second, her brain tried to convince her that she was back in her Beacon Hill apartment, that the nightmare in the parking garage had simply been the result of severe sleep deprivation and corporate burnout. But as she shifted her weight, the mattress beneath her was far too soft, the sheets, a heavy, luxurious silk, rather than her standard Target cotton blend. She snapped her eyes open, her breath caught in her throat. She was lying in the center of a massive four-poster bed made of carved mahogany, draped in deep crimson velvet. The room was the size of her entire Boston apartment, boasting soaring 20-foot ceilings, adorned with intricate gilded crown molding. A colossal crystal chandelier hung from the center, casting a dim, warm glow over the antique furnishings. To her right, a wall of massive floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a terrifyingly steep cliff face, where black ocean waves violently crashed against jagged rocks below. This wasn't Boston. The coastal geography, the brutalist oceans spray, the sprawling architecture, it looked like one of the old Gilded Age mansions in Newport, Rhode Island, but entirely isolated from civilization. Harper shot up, her heart hammering wildly. She looked down at herself. She was still wearing her work clothes, the tailored gray slacks, and the white silk blouse, but her shoes were gone, and her beige trench coat had been carefully draped over a nearby velvet chaise lounge. She instinctively reached for her left wrist. Her Apple Watch Series 8 was missing. Her pockets were empty. Her iPhone, her keys, her wallet, everything was gone. You won't find them, a sharp, musical voice said from the shadows. Harper scrambled backward until her spine hit the heavy wooden headboard, her eyes darting to the corner of the room. A woman stepped into the dim light. She looked like she had just walked off a 1920s Parisian runway. She wore a flawless drop-waist dress of black sequins, her dark hair cut into a razor-sharp bob. Her skin shared the same impossible marble-like pallor as Roman's, but her eyes were a piercing, icy silver. My name is Genevieve, the woman said, her lips curving into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. She carried a silver tray holding a crystal carafe of water and a glass which she set down delicately on the nightstand. I am the King's first lieutenant, and you, Miss Delaney, are the most chaotic variable to enter this estate in 3 centuries. Where am I? Harper demanded, trying to keep the violent tremble out of her voice. If you want money, I work for KPMG, but I'm just an analyst. I don't have wealth. Please, just let me go. Genevieve let out a short melodic laugh that sounded like chimes in a graveyard. Money darling Roman owns the holding companies that own the banks that hold your firm's assets. He practically owns the eastern seaboard. You aren't here for ransom. You are here because you tripped a wire meant for gods, and now the wolves are circling. Harper swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold imported Persian rug. I'm leaving. This is kidnapping. She lunged for the heavy oak double doors across the room. She grabbed the ornate brass handles and yanked with all her body weight. They didn't budge an inch. They weren't just locked. They felt as though they were fused to the wall. I wouldn't advise running, a new voice echoed through the heavy timber of the door. The brass handles suddenly turned on their own, and the doors swung inward so fast Harper stumbled backward, nearly falling. Roman Ashford stepped into the room. He had changed since the parking garage. Gone was the charcoal suit, replaced by a bespoke black velvet velvet smoking jacket and dark trousers. He looked infuriatingly relaxed, holding a crystal tumbler of a dark, viscous amber liquid. His crimson eyes immediately locked onto Harper, scanning her up and down with a possessive, territorial intensity that made her skin burn. Genevieve immediately bowed her head, a gesture of absolute terrifying submission. "My king, the perimeter is secured. The Aegis Group mercenaries are patrolling the cliffside." "Leave us, Genevieve," Roman murmured, not breaking eye contact with Harper. Genevieve vanished. Harper didn't see her walk out. 1 second she was there, and the next, a breeze ruffled the heavy drapes, and the room was empty save for Harper and the vampire who claimed to own her. "You drugged me," Harper accused, backing away until she hit the cold glass of the window panes. She looked out. It was at least a 100-foot drop to the lethal rocks below. "I commanded you to sleep," Roman corrected smoothly, stepping into the room and closing the heavy doors behind him with a flick of his wrist. "Mortal minds are fragile. Had I forced you to stay awake during the transit from Boston to Rhode Island, the magical displacement would have caused your brain to hemorrhage. You should be thanking me, little bird. Thanking you, you stalked me. You left a creepy necklace with my doorman and cornered me in a parking garage." Harper's analytical mind was desperately trying to compartmentalize the terror, to break this down into data points. Threat high, escape routes, none, logic failing. Roman walked over to the velvet chaise lounge, taking a slow sip from his tumbler. "You are still viewing this through a mortal lens, Harper. You think this is a crime of obsession. It is a matter of survival. Yours." He set the glass down and approached her. Harper pressed herself flat against the glass, but there was nowhere left to go. Roman stopped mere inches from her. Up close, he was devastating. He didn't breathe, not really, but she could feel the cold radiating from his body, combating the warmth of her own terrified flush. "Why me?" she whispered, staring up into those glowing crimson depths. "I'm nobody. I run spreadsheets." "You are a Hathorn," Roman said softly, the name carrying a heavy metallic weight. Harper frowned. "My mother's maiden name was Hathorn? How do you know that?" Because John Hathorn, the infamous judge of the Salem witch trials, was not just a paranoid Puritan. He was a hunter. Roman explained, his voice a dark lullaby. But his sister Abigail, she was a true practitioner of the old blood magic. She fled Massachusetts before her brother could burn her at the stake. She changed her name, buried her lineage, and diluted her bloodline into humanity. You are her direct descendant. Harper shook her head in disbelief. "Magic isn't real. Witches aren't real. And yet you are standing in a locked room with a vampire arguing semantics." Roman countered, a dark amusement dancing in his eyes. "Your bloodline carries a latent frequency. It is dormant, practically dead, which is why you've lived a normal, boring life. But when I cast a blood tether spell over my communications network to execute a traitor, your genetic code inadvertently acted as a receiver. You picked up the phone, and in doing so, you lit a beacon that every supernatural predator from New York to Montreal can see." He reached out his cool, marble-like fingers, gently brushing a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. Harper shuddered, unable to pull away from the hypnotic gravity of his touch. "They want to consume you, Harper," he whispered, his thumb tracing her jawline. "Drinking the blood of a Hathorn descendant who has been awakened by a king's tether? It would grant a lesser vampire enough power to challenge my throne. You are the most valuable prey in the world right now." "So what?" Harper's voice cracked. "You're going to lock me in this Gilded Age prison forever." "I am going to keep you alive," Roman said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with absolute authority. "And you will remain by my side until I find a way to sever the tether without killing you in the process." The reality of her situation hit Harper like a physical blow. Her mind raced the spreadsheets and logic models she relied on daily, suddenly collapsing. But as the panic crested, a single horrifying realization pierced through the fog of her fear. "Madison?" Harper shoved Roman's hand away, a sudden surge of adrenaline overpowering her dread. "My sister," she gasped. "Madison, she shares my bloodline. She's a Hathorn too. If they can sense me, can they sense her?" Roman's expression hardened, the faint amusement vanishing instantly. He turned his back on her, walking toward a massive antique mahogany desk in the corner of the room. He tapped the surface, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a sleek, glowing, state-of-the-art holographic interface, a jarring clash of modern tech in the archaic room. "I already have my analysts looking into Madison Delaney," Roman said, his fingers flying across the glowing console with blinding, inhuman speed. 22 years old, currently employed at a high high-end vintage boutique on Newbury Street, resides in a studio in South Boston. Bank of America statements show she purchased a ticket for a ferry to Martha's Vineyard for this weekend. Harper stared at him appalled. You went through her bank records? I went through everything, Roman stated coldly. The moment you answered my call, your entire life became my jurisdiction. Fortunately for your sister, the tether is anchored directly to your soul, not hers. Her blood is dormant. She is invisible to them, unless of course they figure out who you are and use her as leverage. You have to protect her, Harper pleaded, taking a step toward him. Send your people. Hide her. Roman looked at her, his crimson eyes narrowing. My resources are vast, Harper, but they are focused on protecting you. Splitting my vanguard to guard a mortal girl in the heart of Boston is a tactical vulnerability. If anything happens to her, I swear to God I will find a way to kill you myself. Harper snarled, the threat completely absurd, given the power dynamic, but her desperation was absolute. A slow, dark smile crept across Roman's face. He looked at her not with anger, but with profound fascination. Fierce little bird, I admire your spine. Before he could agree or deny her request, a sound shattered the quiet of the estate. It wasn't a blaring siren or a ringing bell. It was a low structural vibration, a deep rhythmic bass that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the cliff. The crystal chandelier above them rattled the glass pendants, clinking together furiously. Roman's head snapped toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. His eyes flared a brilliant, terrifying, luminescent red. The veins under his eyes darkened, turning black against his pale skin. They're here, he snarled, his voice distorting into something monstrous and echoing. Who? Harper backed away, her heart leaping into her throat. Bastion, Roman spat the name like venom. A rogue sovereign from the northern covens. The same rat I was orchestrating a hit against when you intercepted my call. He tracked the beacon faster than I anticipated. A deafening explosion rocked the estate. The floor heaved beneath Harper's feet, throwing her to the ground. She hit the Persian rug hard, her ears ringing. Outside the massive windows, the dark sky was suddenly illuminated by the harsh, blinding flares of incendiary explosives. Roman moved faster than Harper's eyes could track. 1 second he was at the desk. The next he was hauling her off the floor by her waist, tucking her against his side like a rag doll. Do not make a sound, he commanded. He carried her to the massive bookshelf on the far wall, reached behind a leather-bound copy of Dante's Inferno, and pulled. The entire bookshelf silently swung outward, revealing a dark, steel-reinforced panic room. He shoved Harper inside. Stay in the dark, Roman ordered, his face a mask of lethal fury. The door is lined with pure titanium and sealed with blood runes. They cannot scent you through it. If anyone other than Genevieve or myself opens this door, well, it won't matter because I will already be dead. He slammed the bookshelf shut, plunging Harper into absolute suffocating darkness. Through the thick steel, the sounds of the siege were muffled, but the sheer violence of it was unmistakable. Harper huddled in the corner of the small room, her knees pulled to her chest, trembling violently. She heard the staccato crack, crack, crack of heavy automatic gunfire, Roman's Aegis Group mercenaries using modern weaponry. But intertwined with the gunfire were sounds that belonged in a nightmare, the tearing of metal, inhuman shrieks that rattled her teeth, and the wet, heavy thuds of bodies being slammed against stone walls. Bastion's forces hadn't just brought fangs, they had brought tactical gear. Harper could hear the hiss of what sounded like gas canisters and the distinctive whine of drones outside the windows. The supernatural world wasn't just hiding in the shadows, it was heavily militarized. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the master bedroom outside her hiding spot were blown off their hinges with a concussive blast. Harper clamped her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. She pressed her eye to a microscopic seam in the bookshelf's disguised facade, granting her a sliver of a view into the bedroom. 3 men stepped into the room. They wore black tactical gear, wielding Sig Sauer assault rifles, equipped with heavy underbarrel attachments. But their faces were wrong. Their jaws were unhinged, their eyes black, and their fangs fully extended, dripping with saliva. Tear the room apart, one of them hissed, his voice a gurgling rasp. Find the human Bastion, once her alive. Before the intruders could take another step, a shadow dropped from the 20-foot ceiling. Roman landed in the center of the 3 mercenaries without making a single sound. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. The violence that followed was entirely devoid of Hollywood elegance. It was brutal, efficient, and horrifyingly fast. The first mercenary raised his rifle, but Roman backhanded him with such explosive force that the man's head snapped completely backward, his neck snapping with a sound like a fired shotgun. The second intruder fired, the blinding muzzle flash illuminating the room. The bullets tore through Roman's velvet jacket, but he didn't even flinch. Roman lunged his hand, plunging straight through the tactical Kevlar vest of the shooter, piercing his chest cavity. With a sickening wrench, Roman ripped his hand back, clutching a dark, pulsing heart. The vampire crumbled to dust instantly, the heart crumbling with him. The third mercenary dropped his gun and tried to run. Roman was in front of him before he could take a second step. Roman grabbed the man by his throat, lifting him 3 feet off the ground with one hand. "Tell Bastian," Roman whispered, his voice vibrating with a demonic resonance that made Harper's nose bleed inside her hiding spot, "that he has overstepped." Roman tightened his grip, completely crushing the mercenary's windpipe before violently tearing his head from his shoulders. Ash erupted from the corpse, raining down on the Persian rug. Roman stood alone in the ruined bedroom, the chandelier flickering erratically above him. He slowly turned his head, his glowing crimson eyes locking perfectly onto the tiny crack in the bookshelf where Harper was watching. He knew she had seen everything he wanted her to see. The battle outside the estate raged for another 20 minutes before fading into an eerie, blood-soaked silence. The rhythmic bass of the alarms finally ceased, leaving only the sound of the ocean violently churning against the cliffs below. The heavy bookshelf swung open. Roman stood in the threshold of the panic room. His bespoke velvet jacket was ruined, riddled with bullet holes and stained with dark ash. His white shirt was torn, revealing pale, flawless skin that was already knitting itself back together where silver-jacketed rounds had pierced his flesh. The scent of him, metallic blood, ash, and night jasmine, was overwhelming. He reached down, offering Harper his hand. Harper stared at his blood-stained fingers. Her mind flashed back to the brutal decapitation she had just witnessed. She was completely out of her depth, a mortal trapped in a war of gods. But as she looked at Roman's face, stoic, impossibly regal, and fiercely protective, the analytical part of her brain reasserted control. She couldn't afford to be a trembling victim. If she wanted to survive, and if she wanted Madison to survive, she had to play the board she was given. She ignored his hand, pushed herself off the cold steel floor, and stepped out into the ruined bedroom. "Did they breach the lower levels?" she asked, her voice shockingly steady despite the terror still humming in her veins. Roman's eyes widened slightly in surprise at her composure. He slowly lowered his hand. "No, the vanguard held the perimeter. The Aegis mercenaries suffered casualties, but Bastion's forward scouting party was entirely eradicated. He was testing our defenses, hunting for your scent. They know I'm here," Harper stated, looking at the blasted doors of the bedroom, "which means it's only a matter of time before they realize who I am, and when they do, they'll go after Madison to get to me." Roman walked over to the antique desk, pouring himself a fresh glass of the amber liquid. "Your logic is flawless, little bird. Yes, Bastion is a coward who prefers leverage over direct combat. He will target your sister." Harper took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. She walked right up to Roman, stopping mere inches from his chest. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eyes. "I will stop fighting you," Harper said, her voice dropping into the fierce, negotiated tone she used during high-stakes corporate audits. "I won't try to run. I won't try to call the police. I will stay in this gilded cage and let you figure out how to sever this tether. But I have a price." Roman looked down at her, a genuinely captivated smirk playing on his lips. "You are negotiating with a King Harper, a bold move. What is your price?" "Madison," she demanded, her hazel eyes locking onto his crimson ones. "You take your resources, your vanguard, whatever shell corporations and security firms you own, and you put a protective detail on her. You relocate her. You ensure that not a single monster in this city ever breathes in her direction. Do that, and you have my total cooperation." Roman stared at her for a long, heavy moment. The silence in the room was deafening. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, contemplating her demands. "I accept your terms," Roman finally said softly. "On one condition." Harper's stomach tightened. "What condition?" "The tether between us is currently an open radio frequency broadcasting your location and your magical signature to anyone listening," Roman explained, setting the glass down. "I cannot hide you indefinitely, as long as it remains open. I need to encrypt it. I need to bind your signature to mine so that any predator looking for a Hathorn witch only smells the sovereign of the Night Court." "How do you do that?" Harper asked, though the dread pooling in her gut already knew the answer. Roman stepped closer, his physical presence completely enveloping her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "A blood covenant? A bite? I need to consume a fraction of your essence and inject my venom into your bloodstream. It will mask you." Harper stepped back, her breath hitching. "You want to bite me?" I want to protect you, he corrected, his voice a velvet whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. I will not turn you. You will remain mortal, but you will carry my mark. Anyone who looks at you will know that you belong to me, and to touch you is to invite war. Harper weighed the options: death by Bastion's rogues, Madison's slaughter, or submitting to the monstrous, alluring king standing before her. She closed her eyes, took a ragged breath, and tilted her head to the side, exposing the pale, racing pulse of her neck. Do it, she whispered, before I lose my nerve. Roman didn't hesitate. He moved with liquid grace, his arm wrapping securely around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid, unyielding chest. His other hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back further. This will hurt, he murmured against her skin, his lips brushing the erratic pulse point. And then it will be euphoria. Do not fight it. Harper gasped as she felt the sharp, agonizing pierce of his fangs break her skin. Pain flared hot and bright, a sudden violent sting that made her grip his velvet jacket to keep from collapsing. But a second later, the pain vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of pure adrenaline and heat. Her knees buckled, but Roman held her up, effortlessly, drinking deeply. As his venom entered her bloodstream, the world around Harper dissolved. She wasn't in the ruined bedroom anymore. Her mind was suddenly violently thrust into a shared consciousness. She saw flashes of Roman's life, centuries of brutal wars, opulent ballrooms in 18th century France, the cold, solitary weight of an immortal crown. She felt his loneliness, his ruthless power, and a sudden, terrifying obsession with her. But Roman was experiencing something too. Suddenly, Roman tore himself away from her neck, stumbling backward. He wiped the blood from his mouth, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a shock that bordered on absolute terror. Harper slumped against the wall, clutching her bleeding neck, her head swimming in a narcotic haze. What is it? She slurred, trying to focus on him. Roman stared at her, not as prey, not as a complication, but as a mythical artifact he had just unearthed. Your blood, Roman breathed, his voice trembling for the first time. The Hathorn lineage. It wasn't just latent magic. You aren't just a receiver, Harper. What are you talking about? You are a cipher, Roman whispered the ancient word, hanging heavy in the air. Your genetic code. It is the key to unsealing the abyssal gates in Salem, the gates my ancestors bled to lock away. If Bastion or the other covens realize what you truly are, they won't just want to consume you, they will use you to bring about the end of the world. The crushing weight of Roman's revelation hung in the ruined bedroom like a guillotine. Harper pressed her hand against the twin puncture wounds on her neck. The bleeding had already stopped, replaced by a strange pulsing warmth that seemed to radiate through her entire nervous system. The narcotic euphoria of the bite was fading, but the telepathic echo of Roman's mind remained a low rhythmic hum of ancient violence, tactical calculations, and a terrifyingly deep possessiveness centered entirely on her. The abyssal gates, Harper repeated, her analytical mind desperately trying to process the mythological data. You're talking about a physical place, a portal. Roman paced the floor, his velvet shoes crunching over the broken glass and ash. The calm, untouchable sovereign was gone, replaced by a warlord preparing for a siege. Beneath the Charter Street Cemetery in Salem, it is a subterranean necropolis built by the first covens who arrived in the New World. They didn't come on the Mayflower seeking religious freedom, Harper. They came to bury a primordial terror, the feral demonic ancestors of our kind, the fallen. He stopped, his crimson eyes locking onto hers. Your ancestor, Abigail Hathorn, was the architect of the blood seal that locked them away. Only a living vessel with her exact genetic sequence, a cipher, can unlock it. Bastion doesn't just want a throne. He wants to unleash the fallen and reduce this continent to an open slaughterhouse. The heavy oak doors, or what remained of them, were suddenly pushed aside. Genevieve stepped over the splintered wood, her silver eyes scanning the room, landing instantly on the blood smeared across Roman's mouth and Harper's neck. A flash of shock registered on her usually impassive face, but she instantly dropped to one knee. My king, the Aegis perimeter is holding, but local law enforcement in Newport is responding to the explosions. We have less than 10 minutes before the Rhode Island State Police swarm the cliffs, Genevieve reported crisply. Scrub the security footage. Burn the estate, Roman ordered without hesitation. Deploy the Black Hawk. We are moving to Massachusetts immediately. Harper's heart leaped into her throat. What about Madison? You promised me. Roman turned to Genevieve, his voice vibrating with absolute lethal authority. "Contact the Vanguard Intercept team in Boston. I want a heavily armed extraction unit at Madison Delaney's apartment in Southie. Contract Garda World for mortal air transport. Fly her to the subterranean Alpine Vault in Geneva. If so much as a single rogue vampire looks at her, I will personally skin every lieutenant in your division." "It will be done," Genevieve said, rising smoothly to her feet. "And the cipher—" "She travels with me," Roman said, stepping toward Harper and pulling her trench coat from the velvet chaise. He draped it over her shoulders, his cold hands lingering for a fraction of a second on her collarbone. "We are going to Salem. I must reinforce the runic wards on the gates before Bastion realizes what he truly seeks is already bound to me." Within minutes, the sprawling, Gilded Age mansion was engulfed in unnatural, smokeless blue flames, a magical incendiary designed to leave no forensic evidence. Harper sat strapped into the leather seat of a matte black Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, the deafening roar of the rotors vibrating in her teeth. As they flew low over the dark, churning Atlantic Ocean, heading north toward the Massachusetts coastline, Harper looked at Roman. He sat across from her, a tactical headset over his ears, a heavy Sig Sauer MCX rifle resting casually across his knees. He looked less like a mythical king and more like a Tier 1 military operator. "Roman," Harper said over the secure comms channel, the sound of her own voice sounding small in her ears. "If Bastion realizes I'm the cipher, what happens to the tether?" Roman's jaw tightened. "The blood covenant I forced upon you encrypted your location. You now carry my scent. To the lesser beasts you are invisible, but to a sovereign like Bastion, if he gets close enough, he will see through the encryption. And if he takes you, Harper—" He paused, his crimson eyes darkening with a violent, possessive fury. "I will burn the world to ash before I let him touch you." Harper swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. The spreadsheets, the quarterly reports, the mundane safety of her life at KPMG felt like they belonged to a different universe. She was bound to a monster hunted by an army and carrying a genetic key that could end humanity. And the most terrifying part, as Roman stared at her, she realized she didn't want him to let her go. They landed in a dense private forest clearing just off State Route 128, a few miles outside the historic bounds of Salem Village, now known as Danvers. A pair of armored Mercedes-Benz G-Class SUVs were waiting in the shadows of the tree-line engines, purring silently. The rain had returned, a cold, driving New England drizzle that turned the forest floor into a slick, muddy trap. Harper sat in the back of the lead SUV, her shoulder pressed against Roman's. The oppressive silence in the cabin was suddenly shattered by the sharp buzzing of Roman's encrypted satellite phone. He answered it, his expression unreadable. "Report." Harper watched as the color completely drained from Roman's already pale face. The veins beneath his eyes flared stark black. "Where?" Roman hissed, his grip on the phone, cracking the reinforced casing. "How did they bypass the Vanguard?" He listened for another agonizing 10 seconds before crushing the phone in his fist, reducing it to plastic shrapnel and sparking wires. He turned slowly to Harper, and the look of sheer, unadulterated rage in his eyes made her shrink back against the leather seat. "Madison," Harper whispered the name, catching on a sob. "What happened?" The Vanguard extraction team arrived at her apartment in South Boston, Roman said, his voice dropping into a deadly, hollow octave. They found the door unlocked and the apartment empty. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no magical signatures. "She just left." Harper shook her head frantically. "No, she wouldn't just leave at 3 a.m. Someone took her." Bastion didn't use his covens, Roman realized, his analytical mind snapping the pieces together. He used mortal thralls, humans compelled by vampire magic to do their bidding. They leave no supernatural scent. The Aegis perimeter was looking for monsters, not men with badges or corporate credentials. Before Harper could process the horror, the SUV's dashboard lit up with a harsh red warning. "Proximity alert." The driver, a massive Vanguard vampire with scarred features, slammed on the brakes. The heavy armored vehicle fishtailed in the mud, coming to a violent halt just inches from a massive fallen oak tree blocking the narrow dirt road. "Ambush!" the driver roared, unholstering a customized heavy pistol. The tree line erupted, but it wasn't the monstrous, unhinged rogues from the Newport estate. Dozens of men in high-end tactical gear stepped out of the shadows, their rifles trained on the SUVs. They weren't vampires. They were human mercenaries. And stepping out from the center of the blockade was a man Harper recognized instantly, Arthur Pendleton, the senior managing partner at KPMG. Harper pressed her hands against the bulletproof glass, her mouth open in absolute shock. Arthur was a 60-year-old corporate titan known for his ruthless mergers and acquisitions. Now he stood in the freezing rain, his tailored Tom Ford suit plastered to his body, holding a heavily modified assault rifle. His eyes were completely glossed over a milky, terrifying white. He was a thrall. "Miss Delaney," Arthur's voice boomed through a portable megaphone, his tone carrying that same condescending corporate cadence he used in the boardroom, but layered with a demonic distortion. "You failed to submit your PTO request. Master Bastian requires your immediate presence." "He's a thrall," Roman snarled, drawing his MCX rifle. "Bastian infiltrated your financial firm years ago to launder his assets. He must have recognized your name when you triggered the tether." "Roman, please," Harper begged, grabbing his arm. "Don't kill him. He's brainwashed." "He is a meat shield," Roman corrected coldly, "and he is holding your sister." Arthur raised the megaphone again. "If the king of the Night Court attempts to engage my men, have orders to execute the hostage currently secured in the ruins of the Danvers State Hospital, you have 5 minutes to surrender the cipher, or Madison Delaney bleeds out in the asylum." Roman looked at Harper. For the first time, the ancient king looked genuinely torn. If he fought, Madison would die. If he surrendered Harper, the world would burn. Harper didn't hesitate. The corporate analyst inside her took over, compartmentalizing the terror. "You take the men," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I will go to Arthur. I will surrender." "Are you out of your mind?" Roman snapped, grabbing her shoulders. "If you cross that line, I cannot protect you." "You don't need to protect me," Harper said, her hazel eyes blazing with a sudden fierce realization. "Bastian needs the cipher alive to bleed on the seal. He won't kill me, but if you take out Arthur's men now, Bastian will panic and kill Madison. Let them take me to the asylum, follow in the shadows. When he brings me to the seal, we kill him." Roman stared at her, utterly captivated by the ruthless, cold logic radiating from a mortal woman. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, his voice a dark vow. "If he touches one hair on your head," Roman whispered, "I will rip his spine from his body and beat him to death with it. Play your part, little bird. I will be in the shadows." Harper opened the heavy armored door and stepped out into the freezing New England rain, her hands raised. The ruins of the Danvers State Hospital loomed against the stormy sky like a decaying Gothic cathedral. Once a sprawling psychiatric asylum built in the 1870s, it had been largely demolished, but the massive subterranean tunnel network remained a labyrinth of brick and iron that felt like a descent into hell. Arthur's mercenaries zip-tied Harper's wrists and shoved her down a crumbling concrete stairwell into the catacombs beneath the asylum. The air was thick with the scent of mold-wet earth and something far more ancient and metallic. They pushed her into a massive underground cistern. The walls were lined with rusted iron pipes, but the floor was an anomaly. It was perfectly smooth, carved from a single slab of black obsidian, etched with thousands of intricate glowing red runes. In the center of the obsidian floor was a raised altar. Standing beside the altar was Bastian. He was nothing like Roman's terrifying beauty. Bastian's centuries of indulging in dark magic had twisted his physical form. He was tall, gaunt, and completely bald, his skin a translucent gray that revealed the black, rotting veins pulsing beneath. He wore a heavy leather trench coat, and his eyes were a solid, soulless black. Kneeling at his feet, bound and gagged with duct tape, was Madison. She was sobbing, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as she looked at Harper. "Maddie," Harper screamed, struggling against the mercenaries holding her arms. "Ah, the little corporate anomaly," Bastian rasped, his voice sounding like two grinding stones. He stepped forward, grabbing Harper's chin with a grip that bruised her jaw instantly. He sniffed her neck, his lip curling in disgust at the scent of Roman's bite. "Marked by a false king. No matter, the blood in your veins predates his petty empire." "Let her go," Harper demanded, staring directly into the black voids of his eyes. "You want the cipher? You want the seal broken? I'm right here. Let my sister walk out of this tunnel, and I will do whatever you want." Bastian threw his head back and laughed, a sickening wet sound. "You mortals are always negotiating from a place of weakness. I don't need your permission, Harper. I just need your blood." He pulled a massive, curved silver dagger from his coat. "The seal requires a sacrifice, a severing of the Hathorn line to unbind the fallen." He looked down at Madison. "I think the dormant sister's throat will provide an excellent appetizer." Bastian lunged for Madison. A deafening concussive boom shattered the air in the cistern. The heavy iron door at the far end of the tunnel didn't just open, it exploded inward, a 2-ton slab of metal flying across the room and crushing 3 of Arthur's mercenaries against the wall in a spray of crimson. Roman stepped out of the dust and debris. He was no longer trying to look human. His fangs were fully descended, his claws extended from his fingertips, and the air around him physically warped with the sheer oppressive gravity of his rage. "Bastian!" Roman's roar shook the foundation of the asylum. Bastian sneered, dropping Madison and turning to face the sovereign. "Kill him!" he ordered the remaining mercenaries. But Roman moved with the speed of a nightmare. He didn't use guns. He used his bare hands. He tore through the heavily armed mercenaries like tissue paper, decapitating one, crushing the chest cavity of another, his movements a blur of lethal, brutal artistry. Seeing his guards decimated, Bastian lunged at Harper. He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her toward the obsidian altar, raising the silver dagger to slice her palm. "Roman!" Harper screamed. Roman vaulted over the remaining mercenaries, tackling Bastian off the altar. The 2 ancient vampires crashed onto the obsidian floor, a tangle of fangs, claws, and raw, monstrous strength. The shockwave of their collision cracked the stone beneath them. Harper scrambled to her feet, throwing herself onto the ground next to Madison. She desperately tore the duct tape off her sister's mouth. "Harper, what is happening?" Madison shrieked, hysterical. "Keep your head down," Harper yelled, shielding her sister's body with her own. Across the room, Bastian kicked Roman into a stone pillar. Roman recovered instantly, but Bastian was already weaving his hands, summoning a dark, kinetic pulse of magic that blasted Roman backward. Bastian spun around, his black eyes locking onto Harper. "If I cannot have the throne, I will burn the court," Bastian roared. He sliced his own palm with the silver dagger and slammed his bleeding hand onto the obsidian floor. The runes on the floor flared a blinding toxic purple. The ground began to tremble violently. A horrific guttural shrieking echoed from deep beneath the earth, the sound of the fallen, sensing the seal weakening. "He's overriding the seal with dark magic," Roman shouted, struggling to his feet, blood pouring from a gash on his temple. "Harper, run!" But Harper didn't run. The analytical mind that made her the best at KPMG saw the pattern. The runes were a system, an equation. Bastian was trying to corrupt it, but she was the administrative key. Harper grabbed the fallen silver dagger from the floor. "Harper, no!" Madison screamed. Ignoring her sister, Harper rushed the altar. She sliced the blade across her own palm, wincing at the sharp sting. She looked at the toxic purple runes spreading toward her. She slammed her bleeding hand directly onto the center of the altar. "Access denied," Harper whispered. The moment her Hathorn blood touched the stone, the entire subterranean cistern erupted in a blinding, pure white light. The telepathic tether linking her to Roman flared, and she channeled every ounce of the king's ancient power through her body, pushing it directly into the seal. The runes shifted from purple back to crimson, locking into place with a sound like a massive vault door slamming shut. The shrieking from beneath the earth was instantly cut off. The backlash of pure, purified magic exploded outward. It washed over Roman, healing his wounds instantly. But when it hit Bastian, it acted like holy fire. Bastian screamed a high, reedy sound of absolute agony. The dark magic sustaining his rotten body was vaporized by the Hathorn seal. He stumbled backward, his flesh turning to ash, peeling away from his bones, until there was nothing left but a charred skeleton that collapsed into a pile of dust on the obsidian floor. The white light faded. The cistern fell utterly silent, save for the sound of Harper's ragged breathing. Harper collapsed to her knees, clutching her bleeding hand, completely exhausted. Roman was there in a microsecond. He dropped to his knees, gently taking her hand and wrapping it in a handkerchief from his pocket. His crimson eyes were entirely soft, filled with an awe and reverence that completely stripped away his monstrous facade. "You sealed it permanently," Roman breathed, staring at her as if she were a goddess. "You weaponized the seal against him. You brilliant, terrifying little bird." Harper leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. "I told you, I'm good with systems." Madison slowly crawled over, trembling violently, staring at Roman with wide, terrified eyes. Roman looked at the mortal girl, his expression hardening back into the protective king. Your sister will be brought into the fold, Roman promised, softly kissing the top of Harper's head. She will live under my absolute protection. She will never be hunted again. Harper looked up into Roman's eyes. The fear was gone. In its place was an absolute certainty. She had answered a call meant for a monster, but she had found a king, and she had no intention of ever giving up her crown. Take us home, Roman, Harper whispered, her fingers curling into his velvet coat. As you command, my queen, Roman murmured, pulling her into the shadows, forever binding the mortal analyst to the sovereign of the Night Court. Did you expect that epic showdown beneath the streets of Salem? Harper started as an overworked analyst and ended up weaponizing ancient magic to save her sister and claim the sovereign of the Night Court. Her journey from a terrifying wrong number to becoming the queen of the supernatural underworld proves that sometimes destiny calls when you least expect it. If you loved this dark, heart-pounding vampire romance and want more thrilling supernatural stories like this, hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow romance lovers and subscribe so you never miss an episode.